Good evening. I am Vallabh Sambamurthy, the Albert O. Nicholas Dean of the Wisconsin School of Business. To all of you out there, welcome to another edition, the last one for this academic year, of the Badger Executive Talk. We started this program almost 2 years ago as an initiative to bring to life stories of some of our accomplished business badgers who have distinguished themselves through leadership in business and in nonprofit and other domains of activity. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Dorri McWhorter, who is the president and CEO of the YMCA of Metropolitan Chicago. She is a proud business badger and alum of our undergraduate program and has had a very illustrious career both in industry and in leadership roles in the nonprofit sector. So I look forward to our conversation with Dorri. Dorri, welcome.
Hi, Samba. So good to be here. I love being called a business badger. I love that too.
We've actually developed a hashtag, Business Badger.
Yes, I use it and I love it.
Very good, very good. Dorri, it's really wonderful to meet you. I met you and I knew of you long before I met you. So it was really wonderful when I met you in your office in Chicago. I'm so delighted that you are on the Dean's Advisory Board, and I look forward to your wisdom and your counsel.
Oh, thank you.
But, Dori, tell us how your professional journey began, and how did University of Wisconsin-Madison enter into the picture?
Sure. So my career began, as I like to say, in the late 1900s. So I graduated from Madison in 1995, and with an accounting degree. But what's interesting is that I actually, and some, I don't know if this is still true to today, but when I was there, we didn't have minors per se. And so I had a double major in at that time, it was total quality management, but it was under the HR track. So I actually had accounting and HR management as my sort of double major. And then I also took a number of electives in African American studies. So I say that as sort of a backdrop as, I navigate to how I got here at some point. All of that really plays a role into my journey and how it was shaped. And so I had the great fortune of coming out of the School of Business and starting my career with Arthur Andersen. And it was around, and so I
Yeah.
know you probably have case studies on it now, but at the time, it was one of the big six accounting firms and
Yeah.
a really prestigious firm, and really for me as an accounting student. Played a significant role in shaping how I could leverage my career and learn a lot working at the different clients. And again, because it was in the late 1900s and the late 90s, we saw enterprise ERP systems
Yeah.
really being utilized. And so I just had great experience with Anderson, and one had a great opportunity to work on one of the first worldwide SAP
Mm.
implementations with all the modules in all the different languages and countries. And so really got to understand how business systems and processes worked. A lot at Anderson. And what that allowed me to do was to go on from Arthur Anderson. I left before all the exciting stuff happened in 2002.
You
Um,
knew it was coming.
it was actually not as much as starting at a firm like that. You
Yeah.
just get such great experience, and I was
Yeah.
able to transfer to from the Chicago office of Arthur Anderson into the Atlanta office, which led me to other experiences like. I worked at Bell South there a little bit. And again, I'm dating myself to some degree because wireless services were really
Right.
getting started.
Right.
And then I left Bell South and worked at Booz Allen Hamilton, which for me was super exciting because at that time we were modernizing the IRS. And
Right.
so, and that was around the early 2000s. So I really had an opportunity to do management consulting and public accounting, as well as spend some time at Snap on Tools, a great
Right.
Wisconsin based company,
Right.
and lead their internal audit function. It was really important though, because my experience at Madison in having the accounting degree, as well as having the double major in the total quality management, HR management path. I used to say that I actually created the first internal audit career path because of that, because
Right.
it really was about understanding business systems and processes
Right.
and improving those processes as much as I was able to get the accounting perspective. And so really leveraged, all of those aspects to ultimately do more work in internal auditing, as well as ultimately decide to join the nonprofit sector and use all of that background and experience to run these businesses.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's interesting because your education, understanding numbers, empathy with people, those are great foundations.
Absolutely. And I don't know that I was that calculated at the time, but just was absolutely interested in those
Yeah.
aspects of the educational experience too. And so, but it ultimately absolutely served me well.
Wonderful. Every business badger I have met has a fond memory or a unique memory of Madison. What's your fond memories of Madison? Or how did Madison shape your worldview?
So the ones I could tell, you mean, in
Be-
the business badger
I
context?
wish I could say Vegas rules apply.
Yeah, some of my fondest memories, I really do remember, just, it's interesting because one of my colleagues that I had in our one of our group assignments in our classes, he ended up being one of the partners on the account when I led Snap on Tools, and he walked in the room. I'm like, Joe, so I think one of my fondest memories is really the people that you meet and the connections that you make there. And yes, you spend time with folks, and the rigor of the classes and the coursework is hard, but I just remember having so much fun in our classes and group work, and laughing probably more than you should at accounting stuff. you know People, and
Yeah,
having those experiences and being surrounded by really good people. And so when I did encounter them later in life, whether it's happenstance or not, really feeling all of those fond memories come back as well.
wonderful. So, Dory, your first 10 to 12 years after graduating from the Wisconsin School of Business were in a variety of professional consulting and advising careers, primarily in assisting businesses. What skills did you acquire, and how did this set the foundation for your leadership worldview as you transitioned beyond?
Sure. It's interesting from a question perspective, and thinking about that first, 10 to 12 years. I actually say that I was like a millennial before millennials were a thing, in that my first, actually, I'll say my first 7 years, I had five employers.
Oh,
So I was busy.
yeah,
So started Arthur Anderson, mentioned Booz Allen Hamilton, Bell South, Catholic Healthcare Audit Network, and then ultimately Crow Horwath. And for me, though, from an experience perspective, when I decided to leave Anderson, it was at a time where I was in Atlanta at the time, and had really wanted to experience sort of more than I was experiencing in that space at that time, and wanted to sort of go in-house, and got to go to Bell South, as I mentioned, at a time when they were doing a lot more in establishing the wireless services and the offerings in that space. And then got to go to Booz Allen at a time when, as I mentioned, they were modernizing the IRS. So these were huge change and
yeah,
leading edge technology type of opportunities. Even as I mentioned, when I was at Anderson, being able to work on this worldwide ERP system implementation. So, that first, 10 to 12 years was really filled with what I would consider major change and transformation initiatives
yeah,
that I got to experience in a number of sectors. Healthcare. I mentioned I was with Catholic Healthcare Audit Network during that time as well. And so, for me, what it helped me do from a leadership and expertise was really recognize that leadership matters regardless of the sector,
Right.
regardless of the projects, that it was really important to know how to clearly, be the expert in terms of the technical skills that you're needing to perform a job, but also really recognizing how to build teams and how to leverage those teams to get all those very disparate and diverse objectives of these different projects done. And so I think having all these different roles and being in these different environments really helped me lean into how I do team building, how I ensure that you work through the team and don't do things to the team.
Right.
But really how you actually get a lot done is
Right.
working very much in partnership and collaboration with your team members. And I know it sounds so cliche,
Yeah.
but given the task and the
Yeah.
types of projects and work that I've done,
Yeah.
it really does require you to know how to work with a good team,
Yeah. And
build a team, and then work with it. Yeah.
yeah. And I can see that those experiences in change management probably really served you well as you took on the leadership roles both at YWCA and YMCA, because I heard you talk about you approached that with the perspective of a business mindset in a non-profit environment. And that must have been a lot of your change management, people management, culture, things that were very important in your first 10 to 12 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And really being able to activate, right, and to make sure that you're able to build the teams, but then let them do the work, right.
Yeah.
And so I think it does take the leadership style. So I'm not I'm not a micromanager, because that's too much effort, quite honestly,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so you build a good team, you let them do the work, and you're able to get way more done
Yeah.
than you would otherwise. So that
Yeah.
has absolutely been part of my style developed through the years, for
Yeah.
sure.
Wonderful. In 2013, you made a fundamental transition and a pivot to leadership in the nonprofit sector when you took on the role of the CEO of YWCA Metropolitan Chicago, and you haven't looked back, and then you transitioned into your current role. What motivated you to make that pivot?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One, I was very active. I have to say, when I started my career at Arthur Andersen, what you saw, particularly being in Chicago, was this expectation that you not only do your job, but you also are very active
Yeah.
and engaged in the community and from a civic perspective. And so, to me, those two things always went together. And particularly, sort of the way business is done in Chicago, right? You meet others, you engage, and you want to make
Right.
the surrounding area better as you do your business. And so what I found is that, I was a volunteer for the YWCA and had started, given my background, had started their audit committee. And we were seeing that the organization was continuing to be in a decline year after year. And it just never reconciled for me. I'm like, they do great work. Why is it that they're continuing to see, a reduction in their revenues, given that in my world, everything is, a business of some sort. And so to me, it just didn't make sense that we were continuing to see this decline. So what I said, I wanted to help them create a better business model. And so for me, it was about looking at them as a business and recognizing that nonprofit is a tax status and not a business model.
Yeah.
However, people often say, well, it's a nonprofit. I'm like, well, they still are in the same marketplace, meeting
Yeah.
needs and
Yeah.
exchanging value, just like any other business.
Right.
And so how do we make sure that we shore up those businesses,
Yeah.
because the result and the impact of those businesses are so positive for society. So
Right.
when I made that shift, it was that I really wanted to focus on this particular business, I guess that particular business, since I'm at a different organization now. But
Yeah.
for me, it wasn't the attraction to the nonprofit sector as much as it was that I wanted to work on the business that the
Right.
YWCA was bringing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that quote you that attribute to you, which is that nonprofits, similar business model, just different tax structure.
Absolutely.
But can you talk a little bit more about what leadership skills did you find were transferable from your first 10 to 12 years into the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, well, I mentioned, building the team. So we actually
Right.
built a highly qualified and team of experts to deliver on the services. But because we did that, it really allowed us to shape what that work looked like. And so, for example, I had a nice little sort of what I like to call a cocktail of a leadership
Right.
team,
Yeah.
in the sense that I hired some people out of the for-profit sector and some people that had more of that human services experience. And so by bringing all those expertise together, we really were able to shape sort of a better business. So, for example, the person that I hired to lead the childcare business, she had actually run childcare for-profit organizations and built corporate childcare for companies.
Right.
Leadership, we were able to watch that specific childcare business grow from like $3 million to a $16 million business. And so, for me, it really was about who can I bring together to have a vision for that type of work, and really make sure that we then build a team around them to support that growth. And so, and for us, growth not only meant the economic growth of the organization, but the impact that we would have because we could do more. And so, at the Y with this particular team, the YW, we were able to grow from initially like a $10 million, $1 million+ losses to right before I left, we delivered a $40 million budget.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, Dori, there is a ancient saying, may you live in interesting times. It's never clear whether that's a blessing or a curse.
Yeah.
But you transitioned into your current role as the CEO and president of YMCA right in the middle of the pandemic in 2021. And so that must have been, can I take on anything more challenging than that? So, how did you approach your role of transitioning into a large organization at a time of disruption? And what lessons did you learn about leadership in a time of resilience and change, when as human beings we all seek stability and constance?
Sure. So one of the things that I finally have come to recognize is that I'm a change junkie. Attracted me earlier in my career. And it's the same thing as I moved to the YMCA, recognizing that from a COVID perspective, the nature of the business, which they do operate a significant amount of fitness centers and childcare centers, were mandated closed. And so their operating model quickly saw their revenues almost decrease by half. So they were almost $100 million organization before and had gone down to 50 million. And I saw that as, oh my goodness, there's a lot of opportunity here,
Yeah.
and a lot of people will need us as we look to come back online. And so I was like, what better time than to do this now, right? And so for me, it really was about the opportunity to create a greater impact. And given that it's the YMCA, the portfolio is just by nature a little more expansive than the YWCA,
Yeah.
because of course, as you can imagine, with the YWCA, we were focused heavily on services primarily for women, although we absolutely served men. But in the YMCA, there's just a broader portfolio of services for women, men, families, for the whole
Right.
human
Right.
human race, right? And so, but really being able to do that during the pandemic was, I chose that because I just knew that it would be ripe for change,
Right.
and it would be a good, and people are more open
Right.
during to some degree to
Yeah.
wild and crazy ideas. Like we
Yeah.
tried a lot of things at the YW that were,
Yeah.
fortunately successful, like, launching an exchange traded fund and being a first nonprofit to do so. So I really felt that there was a lot of opportunity because of the scope of services that the YMCA provided, that we would be able to, really do some new and different things.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Dori, your journey is exemplary for how you have navigated the challenges of breaking through barriers as a woman of color. And in that sense, you were a pioneer before we started having these extensive conversations. How did you do it? And what message do you have for others out there, many in our audience, about keeping the faith or being resilient, believing in yourself, and not falling victim to the imposter syndrome?
Sure, and I know that everyone has their own sort of, perspective and experiences given their environment. But I have to say, one thing for me is that, I grew up with a father who was raised in the South and
Right.
in the deep South, Macomb, Mississippi. And his perspective always helped me a lot. So he would say, Dorri, nobody's better than you. And then
Yeah.
he quickly say, but you're no better than me. So it was always this humbling effect. But what it showed me is that, we're all as human beings trying to figure this out. And so if I have a perspective that I think can be valuable and shared, I'm going to do that. And if it's an environment that won't allow me to do that, then I'll choose to move on from that environment. And
Yeah.
so I've really just begun to own that, that people
Yeah.
are who they are. And so that shouldn't necessarily impede on my ability to demonstrate that. And, to the degree that to demonstrate what I believe I can bring to the table. And, and I've been in a lot of situations. So when I became a partner at Crow Horwath, I was the firm's first Black partner from a 90-year-old firm at the time. And, being at the YMCA out of a 164-year history, I'm the first woman and
Yeah.
first African American. And so for me, I'm like, okay, what now? How can I really leverage, the experience I described
Yeah.
in my perspectives to make this organization better? And I recognize too that I have to model what I want the rest of the world to do.
Yeah.
So to the degree that, as we've at least been told, Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. And
Yes.
so I want to model that too. So I
Right.
actively choose diverse perspectives around me. There's this sort of old wives' tale, I guess, in the Chicago area that talked about when Amoco was here in
Mm.
Chicago. Before all of its acquisitions and all that good stuff, that there was a woman that was at a meeting and talked about not having the ability to um, pay for gas because she'd have to get her child out the car, and it was just such an inconvenience. So we were told that that's how pay at the pump started, that a woman expressed her perspective that
Yeah.
it's hard to go pay for gas
Yeah.
with your children or whatever
Right.
with you. And so now we have this amazing
Yeah.
service that's convenient for all of us. So I
Mm.
always say diversity done right benefits everybody. I also say too that there had to be a man that said ESPN is needed. So now we got TVs at every pump. So I'm not sure about that one. And now
Yeah.
marketers see us everywhere. But
Yeah.
but my point is that I really do think it's important that we, whatever experiences we have because of our gender or ethnicity, that it's important for us to be that authentic,
Yeah.
um, to express our authenticity and
Yeah.
truly bring our full selves, because our perspectives matter. And being able to ensure that we show up in these spaces really does improve the opportunities that I think available
Mm.
for everyone.
Right. I do appreciate the wisdom of your father, which
Mhm.
is a true balance between belief in yourself and at
Mhm.
the same time the right dose of humility. And those are very important values.
Right, right.
So, Dori, let's talk about some of the things we have seen around us. One of which is we're all talking about the new normal, that pivot to the new normal after the COVID. And one of the big challenges is talent management, people retention, and organizational climate and culture. These are all becoming significant. So, at the time of great resignation and a much different change of balance, a balance of change of the equation between people and their organizations, how do you think leadership can be effective in talent acquisition, retention, and growth?
Sure. I think that this is such an important, question now as we, understand what life looks like today. Um, and I think it's really important that we really are, being people centered, and by people
Right.
I mean your employee, your team centered, and understanding what they need. I feel that we've always been very focused on how we, most companies, of course, focus on customers and what that means. But if we treat our people like our customers as well, we have a great opportunity to truly attract and retain the talent that we know we need to run incredible businesses. We think about businesses as B2C or B2P, or excuse
Yeah.
me, B2B. I always say they're B2P because on the other side of that, there's always a person, right? And so regardless
Yes.
of the transaction, whether it's a commercial transaction in nature or a person or an individual transaction in nature, the fact is that there's always a person making a decision on the other side of that. So how do we think about the impact that we have on the individuals and the people, starting with our very own people that we work with on all the decisions that we make, right? And so I feel like the great resignation that we're seeing, I've seen articles refer to it as well as a great reassessment. And I
Yeah.
think that is pretty adequate, accurate in saying that, it's not that people don't want to work, because I've heard that too. I actually
Mhm.
think that people don't want to work your job, right? Like they don't want to do
Yeah.
what we were doing before, or
Yes.
they don't want to do it in the way you expected them to do it
Yeah.
before. And
Yeah.
so I think the more we lean into truly understanding what people want and what that looks like, and I know that it's hard because we're a litigious country, right? So we don't want to be unfair or treat people
Yeah.
differently. But at the same time, we treat our customers as they want to be treated, but we
Yeah.
haven't necessarily figured out how do we effectively do that. That's that HR management stuff coming back from my days at Madison, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but how do we make sure that we're perhaps creating more bespoke experiences for
Yeah. Yeah.
our team members, just like we do our customers?
Yeah. Now that's interesting. I've added a new word to my lexicon. Go from B to B to B to C to it's about B to P.
Yes, yes.
Do you have an example of what it means to be employee centric in the B2P framework? You also said engage people on their purpose. So, do you have an example of how do we do that?
Absolutely. So when I was at the YWCA, we were seeing significant turnover, and people were attributing it to the usual suspects. Well, we're nonprofits, so we don't pay as well. So
Mm.
particularly in our clinical roles, they could go to hospitals and make more money. And I was like, first of all, hospitals, most of them are nonprofits too, so that's not necessarily the excuse.
Yeah.
But what I saw is that we weren't engaging with our people and really helping them understand, because again, another assumption was because we're a nonprofit that people were here for the purpose, right? I'm like, yeah, no, people also need to get paid. And so, from my perspective, it really did become important for us to lean in and understand how can people have amazing careers here and how do we facilitate that. And so what we did is re-examine our entire HR process and systems, and we I would say we transformed the role of our chief human resources officer, and she developed an employment brand that we wanted to fully live into, called Possibilities Partners, and
Yeah.
unleashing purpose and potential was part of that. And so when I was re-examining what her role is, I was teasing her and saying that we should name you our chief possibility, potential, and purpose officer, and then
Right.
we can call you C3PO. And so, but we settled on chief possibility officer.
Yeah.
But we did that very intentionally to make sure that we could remind our people that the role of HR and the function is for you to fulfill your potential and possibilities. And so
Yeah.
how can we support and facilitate that? And so ultimately what we saw, this 40% retention rate went down to something a little more normal, like 14%.
Right. Right.
And we were able, but the other side of that, we grew our business too, because we kept our people, therefore they could really understand what we needed to do to grow. And
Right.
and in their expression of who they are, we were able to do amazing things. I mentioned the ETF. We
Yeah.
built Tiny Boots, where we provided free childcare for veterans. That was one of the only ones in the country that did that, and was subsequently looked at by congressional leaders to see if we could replicate that. So
Mhm.
by leaning into helping our people truly be their best selves, and unleash that purpose and potential, we were allowing them to continue to express themselves and grow the work for us
Yeah.
at the same time. So it was
Right.
so the YW is absolutely an example of where that purpose met opportunity and really benefited the organization and the people.
Right. I love it. C3PO for a Star
C3PO.
Wars junkie. That's that's the best way to remember the Dorri McWhorter model.
Yes.
uh, you also said, continuing on that theme, that part of this being employee centric or people first is everyone has value
Mhm.
and purpose. And the role of organization or leadership is to help people discover that and empower them. Can you talk a little bit more about how you have brought that to life in the organization that you have led?
Sure. It's really hard, I think, for a lot of the corporate structures that we have. Part of the reason I do think I'm able to do some of these things is because I've gotten more permission in the
Right,
nonprofit space, right?
right,
Because the businesses in and of themselves, being impact human services type of businesses, are supportive in theory at least, to helping people. And so I could start by helping the people internally, reach their potential and their purpose, and recognize that, I say this not just at the YW, but period, like everyone has value. So the question is, how do we ensure that the value that they bring to the table is truly facilitated? So how do we create environments that allow them to fully express themselves and build the communities that they need to within the workplace to allow them to do their best work? And that's not a small feat by any means. I think that, we're like, oh, come do your best work here. But then we make the processes and the environments challenging.
right.
And so one of the things that I really think is important is how, we do need to take more time with our people. So in the case of the YW, we had eliminated job, or excuse me, the sort of the annual evaluation process,
Right, right,
and leaned into creating what we were calling possibility partner conversations, and actually meeting with people and understanding how we can better support them in the work that they're trying to do. And by the way, what are your other goals in life?
right,
Right.
right.
And not that we were trying to make all of our supervisors mini counselors or anything, but I think this is going to be even more important, because the world that we saw with COVID and work and life really blended in ways that I don't think any employer was really ready for.
Right.
And so now we have to understand how life impacts work and how work impacts life at a different level.
Mm,
So
yeah,
what can we do to truly not only engage people on their purpose?
yeah. So marrying their purpose with
Right.
their possibilities.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. It's great. Uh, you also talked about, in general, for profit or non-profit, every business is a social enterprise. And today we are hearing a lot of conversations around what is the purpose of business,
Hmm.
and a growing consensus that it has to grow, the purpose of a business must grow beyond sustaining profits to a responsibility toward people, the planet, and the society.
Mhm.
So, what are your views about the purpose of business today? Is it hard to make that shift? And what would your advice be, since you lived in both worlds?
Sure. So I always start this particular thought by saying, make no mistake about it, I am a capitalist, right? Like, make no mistake about it.
Yeah,
However, I do believe that there's better ways than others to do capitalism, right? And the fact of the matter is that while businesses are talking about impact and the way they impact society today, there's always an impact. So I always say that all businesses are social enterprises, whether they know it or not. There's an impact to society. Always. The question is, how aware are we of the impact that a business may have across its entire value chain? And so think about community impact of businesses as sort of what they directly, perhaps philanthropically, contribute to communities, versus recognizing that how you hire, who your suppliers are, how you engage in your business is just as important as how you use those resources that your
Right.
business generates. And so for me, I just want people to recognize that while we do bifurcate the impact of business, whether we, look at it from a profit perspective, an environmental perspective, or society perspective, all those things are happening all the time.
Yeah.
We've only prioritized the financial aspect. And I know that some of the legal people will be like, well, a corporation is intended to, yeah. That's all
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
However, there is always an impact on the environment and society.
Yeah.
And I just think the more businesses lean into recognizing what those impacts are, the better off we'll be. We'll see more sustainable businesses, and we'll see sustainable not just on the environmental sustainable realm, but financially sustainable too. Because we always, I say this too, it's not just me saying it, we all know that businesses can't be successful in societies that fail. I've never seen
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
And so, to the degree that businesses can take the leadership, I would actually tell the YWCA this all the time, that the mission of the YWCA was to eliminate racism and empower women. I was like, McDonald's could put us out of business if they ever change their mission. Hired more women, they employed more people of color.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I do think it's a matter of perspective and how
Yeah.
you look at the business,
Yeah.
and recognizing that all businesses are platforms to advance society.
Right. And it's interesting. Today is Earth Day. And
Yeah.
so this evening, one of the things I did was speak to a group of very passionate business badgers. They're about the organization is called SIBA. But the point is that the younger generation has no patience. They're demanding this kind of a change, a broader sense of the purpose of business. And so it is certainly interesting because you have lived it and you
Mhm.
have transcended two different worldviews.
Yeah.
But it looks like, Dorri, we have an audience out there. So let's go to some questions. And this is a question from Betsy. As an experienced nonprofit leader, what advice would you offer to community members serving on nonprofit boards?
Yeah. So one of the big pieces that I have to say um, when we serve on nonprofit boards is to don't turn off our thinking cap, right? So I think people often talk about approaching the nonprofit world as their heart work,
Right.
leaving their head work to their
Right.
day jobs. And
Right.
I'm like, yeah, no, we need that head too, right? We need to understand,
Yes.
and people to really bring their good ideas, their business acumen, all of that applies to the nonprofit space. So I really do appreciate and try to encourage leaders that want to participate in the nonprofit space to absolutely do it from a heartfelt perspective. But don't forget that we do need that business acumen,
Right.
that understanding of what's happening in the marketplace, because that does affect our business too, and how we can, stay ahead, or at least in a real time always understand the context that we're operating in. And I think our board members, in being exposed to different aspects of the marketplace, can bring that intel to
Right.
us.
Right. Right. Especially the whole notion of business as a force for good, or the
Yeah.
acumen is, like you said, ultimately it's the customer centricity, wherever you are, and
Mhm.
so makes sense.
Yeah.
Here is another question, Dory. You talk a lot about how your time in for-profit companies prepared you to lead the YWCA and the YMCA. What do you say are the major differences in the nonprofit space?
Sure. And I very do mean this, other than the tax status, right? So I feel like we get the most tax efficient position to change the
Yeah,
world, right? But
yeah,
businesses should also be changing the world. And so, really, you know, other than truly being explicit about its mission, when it comes to running the business, there actually isn't a lot of
right,
difference. For me in particular, it's really important to have had that training. And it's really not the case of, I'm a hammer and see nails everywhere. It really is that nonprofits are just a different tax status, but you still need the right people, the right strategies, the right, resources relative to the financial resources. But to some degree, often nonprofits are limited to resources because the capital structures are different, right? Like we can't access the capital markets until we develop an ETF. We could access them differently.
Right.
But so there's absolutely fundamental differences in the business models themselves. But relative to how you would think about operating a nonprofit, it's not any different than operating a for-profit business. It's just different tools and resources that you have to work within the realm of.
Yeah. So here's the next question, Dorri. As a socially conscious business leader, what do you suggest to someone who strives to do the same but doesn't know where to start,
Sure.
especially if they're not in leadership position, especially if they're not in upper management?
Sure. No, and I think that's really important because I often think that when we talk about, helping advance, society or change the world, we think about it in these big initiatives. And I really do believe it boils down to what can you do within your sort of realm of responsibilities or your scope, whether it's a scope of work or within just your daily life. And I often think about workplace. I always say it's just a way to organize people, by the way. So as a university, by the way, so as nonprofits, whatever the case may be, regardless of the label, it's always taking sort of a subset of humanity and putting in front of you. And so, regardless of what your role is or the level, you can always create a better experience for anybody that you come into contact with. And so I really try to take the pressure off of people and let them know that it doesn't have to be about, your role that allows you to create better human experiences. It can be from wherever you are, whatever you have access to, whether it's your cube mate, I guess not your cube mate, your Zoom mate, but
New
whatever,
words.
however humanity presents itself in front of
Yeah.
you, you have
Yeah.
an opportunity to create a better impact.
Yeah. Great. Looks like we've really stimulated the audience, Dorri. The questions are flying in. So,
Okay.
next one from Sadie. What would you say is the biggest challenge in moving from for profits to the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, this is probably going to be a very obvious answer, but I do think it's the structure of capital
Right.
because by default, as a nonprofit, you are limited to certain streams of resources. So donations, philanthropic, I call it all capital. So philanthropic capital,
Yeah.
of course, grants and things like that. But, I often think about the structure of it in and of itself, and by its nature, because it's a nonprofit, there is no equity. So, the workers never really receive any equity, right? And which we know is such a wealth creation and wealth generation mechanism. And so, to me, the challenge is being able to attract
Right.
people because you don't have those mechanisms that you have in the for-profit space. Like you can't offer stock options and equity and other,
Right.
incentives that people want to come in this space and do this work because it's still work, right? Just
Yes.
because the work is helping other people or
Yeah.
improve society, whatever the case may be, it still takes work.
Yeah.
And so I do think that is a challenge from moving to the sector. You just have limited tools that you can operate within based on the literally the tax status.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So Lauren wants to know, what are you most excited about related to the nonprofit industry right now?
Yeah, I'm excited that we're seeing, as we talked about earlier, Samba, with this sort of new normal and
Yeah.
more people focusing on the impact that COVID had and the lives that were changed because of it. Because we are in the nonprofit sector, we actually get permission to really lean into that
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
really recognize what can we do to improve people's
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah.
And I think that to me is just a space where it is exciting because we see needs evolve and lots of things happening, and we get to be on the forefront of
Yeah.
understanding how we can help and what that looks like. And
Yeah.
so to me, that's exciting.
Yeah. It's certainly exciting because I would imagine, going back to the C3PO model, that
Hmm.
people are attracted to the nonprofits even more so with a greater sense of purpose.
Hmm.
And they probably come there with a desire to express their purpose. So it's
Hmm.
a great laboratory for testing out this new model of employer-employee relationship, leadership,
Absolutely.
follower
Absolutely.
relationship. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah.
Mm.
So Grace wants to know, how do you negotiate conversations with staff, leaders at nonprofits who dislike approaching their mission centric work from a business perspective?
Someone must have been spying on me when I was at the YW and being called corporate. Like that was an
There
insult,
you go.
right? Like
Yeah.
you corporate. And I was like, okay. What's interesting is that it's unfortunate, and this is where I go back to stating that I'm a capitalist because unfortunately, the way capitalism has been done has really given it a bad
It has a
name,
bad
right?
name. Yeah.
And so we've removed the mission oriented, not even removed. I don't even know if it was there. It probably was there at one time. Who knows? But I do think it's important for us to think about all work as mission based work and understanding, again, the impact that the work has on society and the people and the environment. And so all of it should be mission driven, bottom
Yeah.
line, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
corporations are trying to understand more and more how they articulate their mission from a very human centric perspective. So I actually prefer what I'm calling human centered capitalism,
Yeah.
where, we hear stakeholder capitalism, but if we actually think about how do we center the human and the experience and the impact of the human, with capitalism, I think is really important. And so, it was tough, particularly being at the YW where there's a lot of, we have a large number of social workers and folks that was like, what is she talking about? That,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
we're a business and value,
Sure.
until they recognized
Right.
that they were bringing a lot of value to the market based on the services we were providing and how we were able to not only raise their salaries but do more work and deliver more impact because we recognize the value we do have
Yeah.
in the same marketplace that everyone else was participating.
Right. Right.
And so, I just think it's unfortunate that we've put mission on the other side of profit when they can be done hand in hand.
Right.
And unfortunately, the models today have done that, either
Yeah.
or, and it doesn't have to be.
True. In a way, it's unfortunate that at certain moment in time, organizations became machines or mechanistic, and we lost that humanism. And
Mm-hmm.
today, it looks like we are reimagining the purpose of business, and hopefully, that's a very refreshing approach. And you were among the people who recognize that early, and you're able to lead into a nonprofit world with a business minded perspective. Molly wants to know, you talked a lot about allowing employees to have a purpose. How do you allow individuals the opportunity to share their passion at the YMCA?
Sure. So for the YMCA, we really have to continue to remind people that, bless you, that that it's okay to, honestly. So one of the things that I've done is set up an ideas at YMCA as an email. And I know that that sounds so simple, but the culture before didn't necessarily invite ideas relative to anyone in the organization being able to express them. And so we're working on, as I mentioned earlier, the impact that COVID had on this business was pretty significant, negatively, in a negative way.
Right.
And so my perspective is that we need all brains on the table for this if we're
Yeah.
going to do this turnaround. And
Yeah.
so I put together this sort of sustainability task force, and I curated the people pretty much based on the ideas. I'm like, oh, that was a great idea. You need to come to the table on this.
Mhm.
And so part of what I've been wanting to do is, understand where that purpose meets the ability for us to support the organization and environment, and creating more formal channels like that, as well as continuing to model that permission, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
just because you say be yourself or whatever the case may be,
Right.
doesn't
Right.
mean that you actually have processes and a culture that supports
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
so that's something that we're actively working on. In my 9 months, we
Right.
hired actually what we call our chief people and culture officer,
Yeah.
to make sure that we are providing a culture where people can have that individual expression of themselves, and be authentic as we try to work our
Yeah.
way through another transformation.
Sure. Dorri, how do you think the YMCA, Metro Chicago, differs from other YMCAs across the nations? Are there challenges that your community faces specifically?
Yeah, so I'm still learning more and more. I've been here, the last 9 months, and I'm learning more and more about the different YMCA's. And the what I love is that the YMCA is able, regardless of where it's located, is really able to lean into what that specific community that it serves needs. And so I think Chicago, we're fortunate that it's the geographic, excuse me, the geographic footprint of the YMCA Metropolitan Chicago is pretty, diverse in and of itself. And so I think it's unique in that we have, urban, suburban, rural, because of our camps as well, that allows us to reach a lot of different people in a lot of different
Right.
ways. And so what the challenge is for that is that we actually, part of the decline that I think we experience is that we sort of had a model for approaching everyone the same. I'm like,
Right.
yeah, no, that's not going to work. We really do need to, even within our geography, really lean in. And as I know in a lot of different markets that, communities differ block by block.
Right.
And we have a presence in so many different communities. So we need to continue to develop that and make it our competency to lean into understanding what that community specifically needs, and then make sure we're structuring our work to meet that need. And so that's something that, whether it's, we're seeing everything from food insecurity. And I think I mentioned, Samba and I were talking
Yeah.
about, when we were getting on the call, we were talking about just the impact of COVID. And
Yeah.
so we see in some communities, health inequities, food insecurity, but we also see in other communities, mental health situations and other, behavioral issues and suicidal ideation. So it's amazing to see, from a human experience perspective, what's happening across, one marketplace,
Right.
but very different geographies. And so I do think that, in terms of what challenges the different communities are facing, it really does vary based on what that geography is.
Right.
And now our job is to really lean in and understand what that is to make sure we can meet those needs.
Right. Dorri, this is a very fascinating conversation. You have put together enough ideas that I consider you as a management guru.
I'll add that to my LinkedIn.
So there must be a book that is waiting to be written by Dorri McWhorter, the
Hmm.
new management guru. What will be the title of that book?
Lead with love. Yeah, I think that I don't know, Samba. I'll have to get your consultation. Is it lead with love or lead with joy? One of the two, right? I do think that there's, you know,
They're both important.
yes, I have a profound love for humanity, and I
Yeah.
want that to be expressed in everything that I do. And
Yeah.
so I all sort of approached our work in ways that recognizes the humanity in each other, that the world would be a lot better place.
I can vouch for that. I must confess that this is not something I'm encouraging people to do, but whenever I roll out of sleep, I tend to check my emails.
Yeah.
And I saw your email, was it yesterday or today at around 4 a.m.? But what I remember, which sent me back to sleep with warm feelings, you said, sent with love.
Oh, yeah.
Very nice.
Well, thank you.
Dory, I really enjoyed our conversation tonight. And I hope that our audience out there has also enjoyed hearing your very refreshing and authentic perspective on leadership, taking chances, valuing people. And I hope that, like me, the rest of you will remember, rest of people out there will remember you for your C3PO perspective on people management. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Dory, and I look forward to continued conversations with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samba.
So, that was Dory McWhorter, a well accomplished, proud business badger who has had a wealth of experiences, and I hope that you all enjoyed hearing her refreshing perspectives. Well, I have certainly enjoyed hosting the Badger Executive Talks. And as we head into the summer, we're going to take a pause. And then Please look forward to our new lineup in fall 2022. Until then, good night and on Wisconsin.